deal of experience doing just that. First, to my right, we have Representative Alex Cornell. When Alex is not in the legislative session, he works as the National Field Director for the Truman National Security Project, where he focuses on the issue of renewable energy and how that impacts our national security. Next, we have Simone Lightfoot. In 2004, Simone led the NAACP National Voter Fund's efforts to elect Barack Obama to the U.S. Senate for Illinois. In 2005, she was the campaign manager for the first directly elected African-American mayor of the city of Cincinnati, Ohio, Mark Mallory. Simone also went on to serve as the state director for the NAACP National Voter Fund in the state of Michigan. We also have on our panel Louis Lau. Louis has worked with the press for campaigns in several different capacities over the last few years. In 2008, he was the communications director for former Congressman Don Casu of Louisiana in his campaign and in his official office. He has also worked for the campaigns of Lieutenant Governor Walter Dalton of North Carolina and Congressman Charlie Melanson of Louisiana in 2006, and for direct mail political consulting firm in Baton Rouge during the 2007 Louisiana state election cycle. Finally, we have Aaron Baer. Aaron has worked on numerous campaigns over the past decade in races from Alaska to Georgia. Most recently, he was a national field consultant for the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and for the Barack Obama presidential campaign. Aaron developed and advised 12 battleground state field plans during the 2008 general election. Prior to that, he was the deputy national field director for then Senator Hillary Clinton, where he implemented and oversaw field operations in all 14 presidential primaries contests from March through June 2008. Now, each of you on this panel has had a great deal of experience when it comes to working on campaigns. We'd like to hear each of you talk about the role that you played during the last few months of those campaigns for which you worked. In particular, the questions that we're interested in, first of all, what are field operations? What does it mean to get out the vote? How should a candidate respond when the opponent has resorted to using negative attacks? How should a candidate work with the press during the last few months of the campaign? And how can a candidate make the best use of his or her time and resources during the final days of a campaign? We'll start with Representative Cornell and move down the line. Alex.
Thank you. So I guess what I'll do is hit some of the finance field and then the press things to round it out. Whenever you're thinking of campaigns, really those are the three cornerstones that immediately pop to mind when you're thinking about your strategy and what you're going to do to move into the future. Traditionally, as you know, you'll make a campaign basically timeline that works backwards all the way up to from election day to where you start. And one of the questions they did, I think, would be important is staying in control of your campaign's expenditures. How to best do that, especially as things heat up and go on into the days of the campaign. One of the things that is absolutely vital is to ensure that you have a very good treasurer and a very good lawyer. Because actually what will happen is you may not go to jail, but your treasurer will. And depending on the different laws, actually, sometimes you have to co-sign with them. So you want to ensure that you're staying you want to have a good understanding of it, but you want to have someone you trust and someone you know who's keeping track of these expenditures and the different laws engaged. The other thing is what you want to make sure is that, say, you're going down the street and you see a bunch of campaign signs, and basically your opponent has littered the area, and it looks like you don't exist. Mentally, that's very disturbing as a candidate. You're like, okay, this is very bad. You're probably going to call your campaign manager up and say, hey, come over here, we need to get a bulldozer over. But really, in reality, you have to make sure and stick with your overall campaign budget plan. Because in the larger scheme of things, these signs and where you put your expenditures don't matter as much as what you know to be the reality based on the research you've done, based on the constituency you have. For instance, in my district, I have part of a college, so in that area, we might spend some money putting Facebook ads into that certain area. But to be more effective and blunt, the best thing is actually, because it's a closed community, to do events with that particular constituency. Where I will spend money is on advertising, because we have a large retirement community actually as well. Because that constituency watches TV. They don't go online and browse through Facebook as much. So you want to be very mindful, despite some of the things you might see in your everyday campaign, to stick to your overall plan. Obviously things change. We have a term in the Marine Corps, or semper gummi. And basically you're being flexible to the situation. However, at the same time, you're making sure you do stick to your overall campaign plan. The other thing is you want to do is be aware of, as things progress, more people might offer to give you money, but be aware of who it is and what things come, their donor history. I'll tell you a quick story. I was sitting down with one donor. This is a pretty nice club in DC, and he got a phone call, and a couple people came over to him, and they were talking about something very concerning and serious, and I caught a couple words of it, and thought it was somewhat fascinating. This donor I seen right down was actually one of the chief fundraisers for Ted Stevens. So next day I look in the paper and see Ted Stevens is in a little bit of trouble. Hence, I did not want to I wanted to make sure that we did not receive any money from that particular source. So you want to be obviously aware of how that affects it, what comes along with that. Not just when you start the campaign, but continuing onward into the final days when things start to get crazy. So now when you look at field, for instance, I've had the opportunity to look at both field from a national perspective and a very local perspective. So I guess I'll start a little bit talking about looking at a larger campaign and then narrow it down to some of the nitty-gritty details when you're, say, kind of fluffy at the door. My work with the Truman National Security Project is basically I work as their national field director. So what we've done is we have obviously, we have a number of field directors who have certain parts of the country assigned to them. If it's a statewide campaign, obviously you can divide it by county or voting districts, however it's best to do that. And then you create the volunteer bases. And what they're doing is basically, when it comes down to the end of the campaign, they're really focusing on preparing for GOTV, or get out the vote. So by then, the field of people, particularly say, the Rust Belt area, they've got their veterans lined up and ready to go. So for instance, with the campaign I'm working on right now is looking at national security and climate change. For instance, I'm for independence in oil, as a being a threat to national security, looking at population shifts, rising seawater, or lack of resources in some areas which allows terrorists to take advantage of the displacement. And basically, how that affects our national security is what we're focusing on. So the natural thing is what they're doing is they're targeting a specific constituency in those areas to really be the core volunteers for your get out the vote effort. If you're doing, likewise, they're working with veterans specifically. If you're doing a campaign, you're going to be working with basically, you number everyone in the campaign, everyone you meet. It's really sad they get a number from 1 to 5. And you think, okay, number 1, you're extremely supportive. Number 5, okay, they're going to vote for your opponent and donate to them. And they'll probably come to your house and yell crazy things. However, you're going to look at the 1s and 2s and 3s, 1s and 2s primarily, or in my case, the people who are committed to working on this issue of national security, and get them out to vote. But you want to make sure that you're, as a candidate, you're not responsible for really any of this at this time. It's your campaign manager, it's your field director who's going to be doing all this work. As coming down the home stretch, as a candidate, you're basically being told exactly where to go, where to raise the money, what meetings to be at. So when you get down to the state level, as election day starts to heat up, you're going to have a very specific time level. My other work with national campaigns or statewide was with the DNC organizing different states, particularly for the college towns. And what we did there is they followed and made a statewide plan. And they pretty much followed it and got their volunteer base out. So on election day, the night before, for instance, they had plastered the town with basically telling people it's election day. Because the unfortunate reality is we are thinking about politics pretty much on a regular basis. A lot of Americans actually think, and this is not a jab at America at all, but the unfortunate reality is that a lot of people believe that Earth is still the center of the solar system, because the reality is the education levels in all areas is not the same. And what's election day to us is the most important day of the year. Really, to most people, the weekend and being able to have fun at the beach is the most important day. So you have to put that in perspective. So just remind you that in the day of, for instance, you're going to have a whole line of events. You're going to wake up way too early. You're going to get probably meet your campaign driver. You're going to go to all the different polling places and shake hands. If you're in a cold environment, you're going to have hand warmers to make sure you're very inviting. You're going to learn all the different tricks to make sure what time. You're going to learn the different laws when you're at the polling places. For instance, you can't say you're a candidate, actually, at a lot of polling places. You can't wear a sticker that says you're a candidate, but you can say, "Hi, I'm Alex Cornell-Wahoo. Thank you for coming out to vote today." Then they'll go walk in the voter booth and say, "Who's that person?" "Oh, I recognize that name. It's way too long, it's kind of weird, but I recognize it, it's on the ballot, and luckily it's the first one alphabetically, so maybe they'll vote for me." So it's funny, you laugh at some of these, it's interesting to see how that, because the base of knowledge, if that's the first time they met you, they'll be, okay, well, you took the time to stay at the polls and actually talk with me. And that's going to actually make the decision if they haven't heard from the other candidate. Because the reality is, if you haven't had contact with a candidate, a voter, it takes about 8 contacts to actually sway someone or get them to really know who you are. And those 8 contacts can be from anything from a TV hit to a radio message, an op-ed, a piece of literature, a volunteer going around, you or yourself. So I guess I'll transition more from the national level, which is it's a very different animal, because what you're doing here at the time, you're trying to get as much media as you can, you're trying to raise as much money so that your field crew can do their job and get the GOTV effort, because you're not going to be able to go to the polling places. But if you're running for a state-level race, if you're running for potentially state senate, local city council, the number one most important thing really is getting to those doors ahead of time. So what you want to start out with doing with any campaign, for instance, with the Truman, we target, obviously, a certain population. Veterans have a very good credibility to talk about national security issues, so we work with veterans. Likewise, when you're in your community, you're going to get, hopefully, support from your party who will have what they call the VAN, or that database. They call it different things in different states. But since this last election, ideally that we coded who's Republican, Democrat, Independent. And you'll actually be able to get a printout when you go door to door that says, hey, this is Mary, this is Smith, John, and they live together at this house, and this is how they voted in the last election cycle. Where they voted in the election cycle, this is how we think they voted, which way they went. You'll know all this stuff ahead of time, so you don't want to freak people out and say, hi, I'm Alex Cornell-Wahoo, I heard you supported such and such, and you live on the street, and your phone number's this thing. You want to come up to that, you'll have the sheet behind it, you kind of put it in your clipboard, and you're like hiding it from them so you don't see their name on the list next to a barcode, because you want to make sure it's personal. And what you're doing is you're targeting a specific audience. Because for, say, a small race, you have 23,000 people. In reality, not all of those people vote. Actually, probably maybe half of them, 60, 70% at most will vote. And then you're looking at the party structure, which is more important than we might what I think is believed, because I do a lot of bipartisan work, particularly state legislature. But when it comes down to elections, the reality is, for instance, in one district in Maine, the Republican candidate actually came out and wrote in the newspaper that he's only running because he was asked to and begged to by the party. He said that in the paper. He was like, I don't want to run, but I'm doing it because they begged me to. He still got about a third of the vote in that district, just because he has the R next to his name. So that is still a very powerful thing, because most people probably didn't see that story. Most people just recognized his name. They saw, okay, the party label. So it's those swing voters in the center and these strong voters that you're going to be going to. If you have the time, you want to make sure you're targeting the ones and twos on election day. Those are the people you need to get out to vote. And those are the ones who you know are going to vote and you're going to remind to. You yourself as a candidate are going to go to the twos and threes and ensure you say hi to them. And what you're going to do is actually, you're going to go in and say hi. You never want to spend more than 2 to 3 minutes. You'll have people who literally sit you down in their living room, invite you to talk, and it's wonderful. I've had some great conversations. And then you look out the back window, and the person who you're doing doors around was like, her face is like, get out of there, because you're waiting, and they're kind of tapping the door. And finally, you leave your cell phone away because you never want to interrupt the conversation. And if you're desperate to get out of there, literally they'll knock on the door and say, we have to get to the next thing. And the voters are pretty understanding. They know you need to get to other houses, and they know that you want to meet other people. People who understand and say, hey, I want to be able to meet the rest of the people in the constituency. Just be pretty upfront about them. And the number one thing when you're at the door is just listen, because while you're listening, you're taking notes. You can even write it down. People appreciate it. That means that you're really paying attention. And then you're taking notes. So you walked in the door, you saw their license plate, and it had a veteran decal on it. Maybe it was a Kosovo, maybe it was OAF1 decal. You're writing that down. So you see, well, maybe they have a swing set for kids, or a little playpen, like they have kids. Or like, look at the little dog bracelet, or what leash, or whatever they have. See what the cat's or dog's name is. The small details like that, you're taking note of. If someone was getting a cold or getting sick or something, write it down and say, hey, and then immediately what you're going to do is send them a thank you note saying, hey, thank you for allowing me to stop by, and then make it personal. You're never going to be able to do all this yourself. You'll have this written down. Ideally, you'll have staff or volunteers who will do that, and hopefully have better handwriting than you. And then when it gets down to election day, what you're going to do is you're going to send another card out to them. It's called a clincher card. And what that is, it's basically a standardized message. It says, hi, I'm just reminding you that November 4th is election day. It was great talking with you. We had a wonderful time walk at the door, talking with about whatever issue you were doing. Or, for instance, you probably will never get into a political conversation as much as you want. As a side note, you want them to tell you what they think. Unless they ask you a specific political question, you want to be 100% upfront with them. But most of the time, they will tell you, and you're going to listen, and you're going to explain what you think needs to be done after you do a 30-second spiel. Once you've done the clincher cards, the night of election day comes, everyone's nervous, getting everything together. You have to get someone out of sleep. As a candidate, the campaign manager should tell you you have to go to bed at a certain time. The staff will probably, because you're going to have to be on your game at the polls and do your meeting. If you're in front of the media and you're like drowsy and basically slurring your words, like, okay, people don't want to vote for someone who is not projecting an appearance of being energetic and confident. And then, obviously, on election day, you'll go to the different polls. Your driver will take you there. You'll want to make sure you have a camera person and press. So when you go to vote yourself, you probably want to do that about 10 o'clock or so you can hit the afternoon media, and then people will show a picture of you voting for yourself. and whatnot. Your family will be there to support you. That way it gets another hit in the press, okay, this person's going out, oh, I should vote. And then that night, I'm not going to go into the details of all the GOTV because it's rather gauged. But the things to take away from it is to just make sure that as a candidate yourself, you're the person who's going to make that personal connection. If it's a larger race, then you're going to be doing a lot of media that day and then doing the votes. I'll round it out by saying, really, throughout the entire campaign, you should make sure you do take care of yourself. Some people, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It really is. You do have to set certain guidelines to say, if I have an important media interview, say with CBS or NBC one day, you want to be prepared and get some sleep for that. Because if you go 24/7 all the time, and the worst, you don't want to get, it's kind of an understated thing, but if you get sick during the campaign, it's no excuse. You still have to be out there, really. And if you get sick enough that you can't be out there, especially as the weather starts to get cold and whatnot, you need to be able, you're losing valuable time really to be at the doors. So you obviously carry the hand sanitizer, you put jacket, do shake hands, whatnot. Be aware of these basic things so you take care of yourself through the campaign. That way you can be strong all the way through and it doesn't go up like that. Because people notice when you're not on your game. And throughout all the thing, I would say things will get very hectic. There will be times when it's a great day, the donor just called and he gave you a couple $1 million, right? And soft money to another organization. But then there'll be days where it's absolutely horrible and you're thinking your opponent's just hammering your press and you think this specific reporter just wants to twist your guts out. But overall, you just keep in mind what you're doing it for. Why are you running? And you really, you serve your country and you're here to serve the United States, whether it's as a military member or whether it's an elected official. And as you get that message through, people understand that you want to serve them. And you're there to serve them and make their community a better place.
Thank you, Alex. So I want to bring it back to on the first panel. The first and the second panel, Eric asked, how many people here were running for federal office, state office, or office. So they mentioned, what my background is, but what I would like to do is actually target an audience for state and local races. I definitely applaud the mayor over here. I think that state and local is where you have the biggest impact. Working at the federal level, working for the federal government, obviously it sucks all the air out of the room, but really the state and local level is where you, as a former service member, can really impact your community. So what I also want to do is kind of, as you peel away all the layers of the campaign, we've talked about financing, we've talked about media, we're going to have folks talk about press and what that means, what your image is. At the end of the day, so if election day is November 4th, it's November 5th, you're looking back on what you've just done with your life. You're evaluating the decisions that you've made, and really one thing is going to stick out. You won or you lost, right? What does that mean, you won or you lost? It simply means more people voted for your opponent than voted for you. It's a very simple metric. 50 plus 1. Mr. Lasavita on the second panel said, you're worried about 50 plus 1. So I think we've covered almost everything, but we haven't covered field. Field is your end game. Field is your votes to win. The scenario at which the polls close on election day, you know you've won. So let's move backwards from there. So election day, you're turning out everyone who you have ID'd, and you've identified them as they're voting for you. Even if you haven't necessarily identified them, you know they're going to vote for you if they turn out. So what that means is, if you're in a district with 10,000 people, 5,000 people are going to vote, you have to have 2,501 voters. So you're going to start planning backwards. Well, if I'm going to knock on 2,501 doors, how much time is that going to take? If I'm a candidate and I'm going to run for this office, I'm going to say, well, if I hit, in one night, I hit 4 hours, 100 doors, 250 hours. 250 hours over the space of my campaign is going to be how long? And then you're going to start backtracking and saying, well, people aren't going to start paying attention until 6 weeks. Then there's going to be more hours, more doors in a day than I can knock on. So how am I going to accomplish that? Well, I've got friends, I've got family, I've got people who I know are going to support me. Guess what? You're going to come work for me. I'm not going to pay. You're going to volunteer, but you believe in me. You believe in this campaign. You believe in the issues that I support that I'm going to work for. So what we're going to do is we're both going to knock on doors. And then you find a supporter. You're knocking on doors. You find a supporter like, I'm all about it. I can't give you $15. I can give you an hour of my time. Fantastic. Come knock on doors with me for an hour. So you move backwards and backwards and backwards. And at the end of the day, you figure out how many volunteers are you going to need? How many doors are you going to knock on? How many phone calls do you need to make? So then you're always weighing this balance between resources. I would definitely encourage you to go through the manual. I was reading through the manual on the train ride up, and I was making notes left and right. I agree with this, I don't agree with that, I think this is right, this is that. Here are things that I want to hone, that I want you guys to take home and remember this. So what is field? Field is the most important thing that you can do with your money. I'm biased, I'm a field person. But at the end of the day, you're doing two things on a campaign, and only two things. You are A, raising money. You are B, getting votes. If you're not getting votes, you're raising money. If you're not raising money, then you're getting votes. If you're not doing either of those two things, you are wasting your time, and you're wasting everyone's time around you. But believe you me, I know that you're invested in this. So you're going to look at this metric and say, okay, raising money, getting votes. At the end of the day, if I have $100,000, I have $10,000, I have $10 in my campaign war chest, what does that mean? That means that you didn't spend wisely. All that money should be gone. You should spend all your money, and you want to know, what am I going to spend my money on? Well, you want to spend all your money on turning out people who you know are going to vote for you. Because again, I can't, if you notice here, I'm on message. My message to you is 50 plus 1 at the end of the day. How are you going to win 50 plus 1? So what is field? Field is voter contact. Making phone calls, knocking on doors. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify who's going to vote for you, but that's not enough. Who cares if they say they're going to vote for you? They have to vote for you. You have to drag them to the polls. There's a term in the business, knock and drag. Knock and drag, you may have heard this. On election day, you see on the local news, people are getting in cars and going to vote. More often than not, you have your friends are driving, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Jones, who's 89 years old, who's going to vote for you. You grew up in the town, but you got to make sure they get to the election, they get to the poll. So you're talking about getting your voters to the polls and make sure they're voting for you. Keep moving backwards. Get out the vote. GOTV. What is this nebulous term? What does this really mean? So if you're moving backwards from your votes to win scenario, how many phone calls do you need? How many doors do you need to knock on? How many times do you need to reach out to your supporters, to people you need to persuade? That's how you can determine how many volunteers you're going to need. If someone says, I'm going to volunteer for you, I want to help you out, what you're going to do with your campaign or what your field director is going to do is they're going to create this big list of, okay, we're going to have people at this voting precinct who's going to have a list of names who we know is going to vote for you. At 3 times during that day, they're going to go and they're going to call you and say, okay, on my list of 50 people who said they're going to vote for you who live in this precinct, 25 have voted. So we need to track down those other 25. So you're going to take that, you're going to call, you're going to send someone to go knock on their door, ask them, have they voted yet? If they haven't, let's go right now and take you there. And then the second time of the day, 1 o'clock, you're going to pull your numbers again. Mrs. Johnson still hasn't voted yet. Well, I know Mrs. Johnson doesn't get off work until 5 o'clock. I will call or I will leave a door hanger on her door so that as soon as she comes up, she knows she's got to turn around and go vote. So at the end of the day, on election day, there's nothing you can do. You can't spend any more money. So everyone gets in their cars, they get on the doors, and you're literally finding every single person who hasn't voted that day, and you're sending them to the polls. Because again, at the end of the day, you've made this commitment to yourself. The least you can do is make sure that everyone who's supposed to vote for you voted for you. So that's the single most important thing. Moving back from that, what is a field director? What is a volunteer coordinator? Things that are mentioned in your book. A field director is someone that, again, Mr. Lasavita said on the second panel, you're going to want to know, where am I knocking on doors? Who am I calling? It's the same thing when you're raising money. Who are the people that I need to be spending my time and my resources to contact? It's not going to be every single house on this block, 10 people. Again, it's the same thing. The first thing you should do as a prospective candidate is go and look at the seat that you want to run for. See how many people registered. Go to the election results. How many people voted in the previous election? How many people voted in the last 3 elections of this race? There's a 50% turnout. Wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be knocking on every single door if only ratio of 5 out of 10 are actually going to vote. So this is how, we had this question earlier about how much money should I spend on the state ledge rates if I'm in the Philadelphia media market, if I'm in the national media market. What you really want to look at is how many votes do I need to get, not how many dollars do I need to spend. So you're moving backwards from there. It's always a calculation. Your field director is someone who A, has experience, depending on the level, but B, is data-driven. At the end of the day, how many doors did you knock on? How many voters did you talk to? How many people have identified themselves as supporting you? That's great. 15 people, 16 people are supporting you. How many of them did you ask to support to volunteer? How many of them are going to come in and knock on doors with you? How many of them are going to make phone calls? This is how, again, you want to talk about running a low-budget race, this is how you do it. People don't need to invest with their dollars. They can invest with their feet. They can invest with their hands. They can write for you. They can do follow-up notes. This is how you get your family, your friends involved. This is how you win a local race. This is how you get established. So you want to go back from that. There's also a mention in the booklet here. What's a volunteer coordinator? A volunteer coordinator is the face of the campaign. Volunteers are the face of the campaign. Field staff is the face of the campaign. So if I'm Alex and I'm running for my state house race, I realize that I can't knock on every door and make every phone call myself. More importantly, if I'm dialing for dollars, if I'm trying to raise money, then I need someone out there who is going to help spread my message. So these are your volunteers. Your volunteers are people who obviously support you. They understand your message. They're going to go knock on doors for you. So it's, in effect, campaign multiplier. Aaron making a phone call, 2 Aarons making 2 phone calls, 4 Aarons making 4 phone calls, etc., etc. Some of the best run campaigns are the ones who are drastically underspent in comparison to their opponent, and they win. And on election night, folks would say they're scratching their heads. How did that person win? How did they win? I saw yard signs up the wazoo for this other person. I saw billboards. He was on TV, she was on TV, but this other person won. More often than not, it's because you have a stealth field campaign that's actually talking to voters, talking to your neighbors, talking to people who are going to vote, who are going to persuade them to win. So GOTV is basically a microcosm of your entire campaign. When you start out your campaign, moving all the way back, you're going to run, you're going to start raising money, you want people to know this. So you want to start identifying people who are going to support you. You build your volunteer base immediately. Your volunteers can help you fundraise. They can help you identify voters. If people keep saying, if your donors keep saying, look, I gave you $100, go put a table out on the downtown mall and hand out flyers, that's not the best use of your time. However, if you have a volunteer who won't make phone calls, who won't knock on doors, go have them do that. They want to be invested in your campaign. If your little sister who's 14 years old wants to do something, send her out there with her 4 friends, have them, you have your presence out there, but at the end of the day, you're still working on what you need to do, raise dollars, win votes. Move back from that. When you're talking about your phases of voter contact, this is very crucial. This is what big-time campaigns pay people like Casey O'Shea or Mr. Lusby to figure out. But there are essentially 3 phases. You identify your supporters. It's called banking your supporters. So there's no reason for you to talk to your supporters 8 times. They're going to vote for you. You look at their voting record, they vote every year. Why talk to them 8 times? You're wasting your own time. After you sweep out them, you go back and you ask them, will you volunteer? You pull out your volunteers, you magnify your effect, you magnify the people you can reach out to. Then you start to move into what's called your persuasion universe, which is exactly what that is. This is not necessarily, I'm a Democrat, I'm going to go persuade Republicans. I'm a Republican, I'm going to go persuade Democrats. This is, I'm a Republican who's going to go persuade Republicans who don't vote in local races, but who vote for the president every 4 years to come out and vote. These are the people you're going to reach out to. You're going to persuade these folks to vote. You're going to go talk to them 4 times, 6 times, 8 times. You're going to knock on their door. You're going to show that you care, not just about running, but you care about their issues. You want to reach them. You want to represent them. This is your persuasion universe. So you're going out, you're persuading them. After you've done, you figured out that in order for me to get 50 plus 1, 2,501 votes, I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, okay, I've now got 3,500 people identified supporting me. We're going to go back, we're going to check with them, we're going to make sure they're supported. Then we're going to go ask them if you want a yard sign, whatever else, come on and get it. You want to bring them into your campaign office so that you can sign them up to do something else. And then you're going to make sure that all these folks are in your GeoTV universe. So really what a field operation is. A field operation is at the end of the day, it's going to give you a boost, it's going to guarantee that you win, or it's going to guarantee you to keep it close, but more importantly, it's going to guarantee that everything you've worked hard to accomplish for the entire time that you've run is accomplished. It's the one thing that you really have complete control over more than anything else. And what it really is just planning, it's back planning, it's looking at what you need to do, what you want to do. And more than that, it's a multiplier. The more volunteers, the more supporters you bring on, the bigger the effect your campaign has. To bring it back to a national level. One of the most brilliant things that the president did in the primary was that by identifying people who supported him very early, is he captured all the information. What that means for you is that you have an event, someone comes, they're going to have a coffee with you, they're going to do some sort of event. Well, you want them to write down all the information. You want to have a little half sheet. Everyone who comes to an event is signing. So you have their phone number, their email, and their address. That means that if they're coming to support you, there's no reason you knock on their door. There's no reason to give them a call. If you take them out of your universe, you bank them. They're going to support you. You go back and you call them, you remind them to vote. That's it. So it's actually very methodical. So I think that in terms of new media, in terms of financing your campaign, in terms of everything else you need to do, we get away from the basic fact of shoe leather. It really is shoe leather. You got to knock on doors. You got to make phone calls. If you're around elected officials enough, you can get them off the record, and they'll really tell you, the folks who are involved in politics, that at the end of the day, who can bank more votes, who can reach more voters, who can get their message out, and it really starts, I would say, at the local level. If you look at folks who serve in Congress, you look at folks who are in statewide office, for the most part, they don't jump up there. They work their way up. So I would definitely encourage to go back to the first and second panels. Start at the local level. And if you think that you want to continue to serve at a higher and higher level, move up. But your base, your grassroots, your knocking on doors, your phone calls, is really going to pave your supporter base. And that's how you get there. That's how you get to 50+1. That's how you win on election day. That's how you make sure that everything goes out smoothly.
Okay, so we're going to talk about press. And I think press is what kind of ties everything else we've heard about together. Make sure your field staff and volunteers have the right message. Make sure you're putting out that message to the folks that are supporting that you want to talk about. Make sure you're working in conjunction with your paid media, with earned media out there, and also complement that message. And it also helps you build momentum for fundraising. You're not going to raise any money if people don't think you have a chance and you get that message out. I think there are probably two tiers of press. There's defensive press and offensive press. Defensive press will obviously be responding to an attack, putting out messages. Use an example from last week with Joe Wilson. Obviously that's when everybody responds, but he made a mistake. He decided quickly to apologize. That was his choice to do that. And then he turned it around into a fundraising message. Now, I'm not necessarily commenting on the effectiveness of that, but he decided to take it as his. Can you hear me, Eric?
No, I'm good.
Okay. If you guys saw, is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay. If you guys saw the YouTube video he put out afterwards, it basically turned it around to say that, I apologize to the president, but what I said was substantive, and he made the appeal to that. Now, he was in a rough situation. That's what we need to do, and what I want to get into that is avoiding those situations. That was just sometimes it happens, but you want to be disciplined. You want to stay on message. You want to practice the message. Be repetitive. People don't always. You may think you're being repetitive. People are likely not hearing your message. So if you think you're being boring, you're probably not. You're actually probably just now getting into people's heads. Whenever you have to defend something, or whenever you have to respond to something, you also want to pivot quickly to back into offensive mode. You want to respond to that and then talk about your own message. You don't want to repeat attacks. You want to get on the offense after you've been on the defense. Now, obviously, you want to be an offensive press if you can help it. And where does offensive press us getting your message out to everyone who will listen. That's through press conferences, you can do ride-alongs with reporters, press releases, rallies, ed boards, new media. Those are the basic, traditional ways of doing things. So obviously, press is, I think, in a kind of a flux right now. There's a lot of things that are changing about the field. There's something to be said about the traditional way of doing things. And I think that's always going to be there regardless of what happens into the future. One thing I do want to note, and I think Eric, I was talking to Eric about this earlier, it was on questionnaires. I'm not sure if that's been addressed. But be careful with filling out questionnaires. Obviously, there's some you're going to have to fill out, and you need to, especially for your supporters and groups and organizations. But one I would always watch out for is Project Vote Smart. That has been used against candidates many times, and that's a general rule that you should probably really think hard about filling out Project Vote Smart, because they ask very nuanced questions, and a lot of times they'll come back and haunt you in the future. So just think about that before you fill it out.
Was that again, Project what?
Project Vote Smart. They'll probably send a candidate questionnaire out to every candidate from local state races to president. And it's just basically what you feel in every position. And you want to be very careful about staking yourself out to something. And you might have to come back later on and things change. And you make sure they're going to So we always hear the terms on the record, off the record, on background. And that sounds pretty straightforward, but I think it probably would benefit everybody to kind of think about that. On the record, everything you say can and will be used against you in court of public opinion. You need to be disciplined. You need to practice before you go into an on-the-record interview. You want to stay on message, keep your responses short, and don't go off on the cuff. Just stay very focused and get your message out to that reporter or to whomever you're talking about. Off the record, this means you're not quoted. You're generally trying to persuade a reporter to write in a certain way or even not write a story at all. This is generally something, depending on the size of your campaign, your press secretary will probably do, but if you're looking at a smaller campaign, it's something you may have to do as well. I remember one of my prouder moments as a press secretary was actually, and this is kind of the sad thing about my job sometimes, is it's not what you do, it's what you prevent from happening. There was a potentially pretty damaging story that had come out of a boss about essentially lying about an endorsement, which we'll get into endorsements later, and why this can be scary things to begin with. But I essentially had about a 15-minute conversation with a reporter and got him to not write the story, and that was about a week and a half before the election. It really could have probably changed things that had come out, and we ended someone who said it was actually endorsed our opponent. But I was able to mitigate that problem and get through it. So that's something you do when you're trying to get off the record. You're just trying to basically have a frank conversation with the reporter and shape the story or not have a story. And there's also background. This is usually when you see something like a source close to the campaign says so-and-so. These are things you want to kind of get your message out, but you also want to have some plausible deniability if things backfire and it doesn't go the way you want. So you don't want something necessarily quoted directly to the campaign, but it's something you want out there in the public sphere. Maintaining a good relationship with the press is very important. But you also got to be careful. They're not your friends. They're there to do a job, and you're there to do a job too. But with that being said, you should have a relationship with them. I mean, these are pretty basic things. I mean, be friendly. It's something you learn in kindergarten, right? Like, you don't need to be a jerk to them. I mean, most of them are not out to get you. I mean, but at the same time, some could be, so be careful. I've had some candidates I worked for before. One in particular, every time I talk to the press about it, it's always, they mention the fact that he was so much friendlier than his opponent. He was so much more open and accessible, which I'll get into later. But I think that does play into press. It's not intentional. It's not a bias. It's just natural. I think you look at, be accessible. You don't want to release inflows off the press. That filters out the message. It makes you look like you're trying to hide something. You might just try to have a friendly conversation with them. You don't want to be stiff about it. You also want to be honest with the press. Now, sometimes not too honest. You want to be careful about that. But I think they do appreciate the fact that people are being candid, speaking openly and honestly. I think the best example of that is 2000 with John McCain, the Straight Talk Express. You had the press loved John McCain in 2000, and I think there was a big complaint when they felt like he lost in 2008. That really hurt him because he had been so open and accessible and honest and shot from the hip, and then when you look like that, you look like you change that, when you put it of that, then it really hurts. So make sure you set yourself up well with that. And, you know, in the past job I've had, I definitely think I messed up to a certain degree when my boss went from almost a state rep to a congressman. And there were some situations in the campaign where it was a long story. We were trying to close them off the press a bit, and unfortunately, I think they caught on to that. And I had a conversation with the editor of the paper, and he accused me of closing them off the press. Now, I was more upset with when they were government rates, and part of the reason we weren't giving access. But you want to be careful to make sure you be consistent and you are open and willing to talk to the press. You should make your events open to the press. I think this, especially in the era of ethics and social laws, you want to make sure you're not doing anything behind closed doors. You want to look like you're open. You're open to people. You're not trying to hide anything. You want to make it seem like you're going to be good, honest public official. And then earlier you wanted to define the rules. I said those terms off the record, on the record, on background, but people do have different ideas about them. So you should, or your press secretary, or more likely should have a conversation so everybody knows what you're doing and going to do. Obviously, unfortunate part of politics is you're going to have negative impacts when this happens. And the reason that happens is because it generally works. People say they hate it, but they don't. People respond to negative impacts. First rule is don't overreact when something happens. You want to kind of take a step back and let calmer heads prevail. Nothing good happens from making a spontaneous call to a reporter and then blasting something. You want to think about it and respond in kind. A lot of times you'll see a state party or your opponent or a national party put out a press release on so-and-so. A press release is not significant unless somebody picks it up and uses it. Now, with that being said, if organizations or outlets are starting to pick up press releases without calling you, without talking about it, then that's a problem. That's probably a problem because you didn't have a relationship with the press at the beginning. You want to make sure that they feel comfortable enough to call you and have an honest conversation, and you can always respond in kind. When I say respond in kind, make sure you're doing it over the right means. If you think that your response, if you think an attack warrants a response, you don't want to respond to a radio ad on TV because likely people have not heard that, so you're just repeating an attack. And along the same lines, when I talked about earlier, you don't want to repeat the attack. You want to pivot to a positive message, to a message of why that's not true, and you want to debunk what they said. That goes along with self-research. Know what you've done and what they have done and how you can draw a contrast between the two candidates. I mean, elections are about contrast, and you want to be prepared to be able to debunk that when somebody says that you're whatever. There's a really different attacks. Again, always pivot to a positive message. That's you don't want to just stay stuck in the mud. You want to turn it around for you. You want to try to make it positive. Endorsements. Endorsements, and I'll start out that a lot of times I think their campaigns would like to have the press into endorsements are fairly important. Sometimes they are. But when I was reading over this the packet, one of my favorite political columnists is Chris Cillizza with Washington Post. I don't know if you read his blog, but he has an endorsement hierarchy. This is from the 2008 presidential campaign. But he makes a good point to start. He says, as regular readers know, the fix isn't one to make a big deal out of political endorsements. And I think that is true, but he does go through the hierarchy. And again, this is in the context of 2008. But the first one is the symbolic endorsement. And that's when Senator Kennedy endorsed President Obama or Senator Obama. It's basically made it look like, the Democratic Party, the establishment was behind this Senator Obama. And obviously, you guys are looking at a different situation, but I think you can probably translate that to your races. There's a state-specific, statewide endorsement. Obviously, look at your district-specific. He cites Charlie Crist's endorsement of Kane in 2008. There's a celebrity endorsement, which generally doesn't mean much, but take that as you will. And then there's the state-specific non-statewide endorsement. So that would be like maybe somebody, if you're running for state senate, you have like an assembly state president endorsement. And then there's a pariah endorsement. So that would be getting endorsed by somebody who is not very popular with voters, to say the least. So that's kind of the rundown of endorsements. I would say endorsements are much more important than primaries in general. The reason I say that is because in primaries, you're fighting over the same electorate. People are generally, if you're a Democrat, you have, a set of ideals, but most candidates in that race are going to share those ideals. So if you have endorsements coming in, then that's just one way for typically in that direction. In the general, you're fighting over that 10 or 15% that are persuadable, and endorsements are generally just going to look like party politics. Unless you do something, get a cross-party endorsement, or you get the endorsement of the biggest paper. A good example of endorsements in the primaries, if you look at the Virginia governor's race this year, the Washington Post endorsed Harry Dees, who was a state senator from South Virginia, and there were 2 Northern Virginia candidates who were fighting out that had a lot more money. Craig Dees, as soon as he got the Washington Post endorsement, the signs around Northern Virginia were Washington Post endorses Craig Dees. He came from nowhere and ended up winning 50% of the vote, which is pretty impressive considering. So endorsements do matter. It's not to say you should ignore them, and you should really go after the newspaper endorsements. And you do that by, you have an editorial board with the newspaper. That's when you sit down with their editorial staff, maybe the reporter that covers the race, and they'll ask you some questions, and you have to convince them about why you would be the best candidate to represent that candidate. To prepare for those, you obviously want to stay on message. We also want to know what the newspaper is talking about, what's important to them, what's been in their opinion section, their editorial page for the last month or two, and just find something that you can relate to them, you can talk about, you can convince them of why you're a good candidate in their mind. There's also, and I think the field staff will probably talk more about this, but a group endorsement. Maybe you have the AFL, if there's a teachers union that's big in your state, maybe the religious right in a certain area. Those are more important because they actually turn out to vote. They actually do more than just have you put a little sticker on your direct mail saying endorsed by so-and-so. Those can actually turn out. There's also debates. Touch on it a little bit on debates. Be careful about debates. We all love democracy, and we all want to be ideal about this and say that people should have an honest discussion about their ideas and why they should represent you. But you want to be careful about that. If you're the underdog, then call for a series of debates. Say you want to debate every other day for 2 weeks. That's a common thing to do. You've probably seen that happen 1,000 times because generally the front runner is not going to want to debate maybe once or twice. But that's a way to stake out your ground and make it seem like you're the one that wants to talk about the issues, and the front runner is not. If you're the front runner, you want to just have 1 or 2, and your idea is not doing harm. You want to be careful, tread lightly, and just get through it. If it's kind of an even race, then be careful. Maybe do 3, if that. But this again, debates generally don't. Debates are remembered when something bad happens. A good example is in 2000, Rick Blasey and Hillary Clinton. Blasey was coming on strong towards the end, and then he goes up and essentially, the way it was played out is that he was harassing Hillary Clinton, so you want to be very careful about that. But even still, you get a good one-liner in there, it doesn't always matter. I mean, I think the good example is 1988 with Floyd Nixon and Dan Quayle. I mean, he had a great line about Senator Kennedy. I knew Senator Kennedy, you know Senator Kennedy, or President Kennedy, and they got trounced. So I mean, debates are not. They're important that you don't screw up. Just put it that way. Going into the final weeks, and this kind of segues off of what these guys have said. Have a plan. Work back from election day. From a press plan, you want to have a message of the week or a message of the day, and make that message work. That means you're on offense. You're doing what you want to do. You're not playing defensive press unless you have to. And obviously, you're going to have to because you're going to get good stuff. Keep to that plan if at all possible. Be positive. Show momentum. Nobody wants to jump on a sinking ship. You want to make it seem like your support is ubiquitous and everybody is with you. You want to, even if you're down 30 points, you want to dismiss that and stay positive. Respond when necessary to attacks. Wake up early. Read the clips. Have some money in your campaign. Put together press clips in the morning and sit around with the staff. Read those quickly and decide if you need to do anything about it. Or if there's anything that you can clean off of that to kind of spin into a positive, maybe there's a problem with school funding, maybe you can decide that that's something you can address in your office. Make sure you're showing get mileage out of any endorsements you have, good stories, send them around to the press, make sure that people are seeing that, put them on your website, make sure that your media consultants or your media consultants are getting any good press, so they can do something for that. And you need to constantly remind people why you're running, why they show up. You need to repeat it as many times as possible, because again, they're probably not hearing it. They think you're being a broken record, but you're not. So just stay on message, that's the most important.
Ooh, I was getting, funny, my eyes get heavy, so I hope I'm not the only one. And it wasn't because of you guys. You guys are good. You guys have covered so much, and so I'm going to do more of a recipe type thing, just some things that I've learned from the field. I wanted to take a point of privilege and state that the NAACP is a non-partisan organization that does not endorse candidates, and the work that I did in Illinois was to get out the vote. It just so happens that Senator Barack Obama won. Okay, I want to clear that up in my introduction. When we talk about the field work, field entails all the things that we've talked about. It entails your lit drops. It entails the fundraisers. It entails the volunteer component, the scheduling of the activities, the providing the packets for the workers. If you think of it as those things that you do outside of your campaign office, anything going on out there is considered part of your field operation. When we talk about some of the things that you concern yourself with in the last stretch of the campaign, one thing that I know about new candidates is how naive they are. It never ceases to amaze me now that I've been in this a minute. They will say things like, I can't believe they said that about me. This isn't right in politics. It shouldn't be that way. Well, yeah, that's true. But the reality is it is the way that you find it. And you have to figure out a way to handle the game. It's just like the military. When you first went in, you saw a whole lot of things that didn't seem right or didn't seem fair, but it was amazing, I bet, how you acquiesced and learned that system and probably excelled in it. And you can do that in politics as well. It reminds me of a football player, the analogy I used, who was a championship football player, and at the press conference they say, how does it feel to win the Super Bowl, champ? And his response is, did you see the way he clipped me? And you see how he face masked me? And you're looking like, but you're a football player. And that's what it sounds like with a lot of new politicians when they get in this game and they publicly lambast the press, or they publicly talk about what's going on behind the scenes that they don't think is fair. The public looks at you like you're a baby. Look, you're in the game. It's hard to take this sentiment coming from you, and you don't look like you're ready to play. So be careful with the things that you're putting out there publicly that are truly actually going on behind the scenes. Have your key folk that you can talk to and vent about that. The mayor here has the judge. He can call and talk privately about that, but that isn't something you get out and you do in public. GOTV is about focusing on the low and the moderate areas. It was already talked about. Those folks you know you have or they're with you, don't necessarily spend your time there. That's not what getting out the vote is necessarily about. Getting out the vote is getting out those folks who generally don't vote. You think they'll vote for you, but they generally don't vote in elections, or they vote at a moderate rate. That's what you want to focus on your get the vote out effort. When you talk about team, your team, who your team is, I know you've heard the conversation up here. It sounds like you need 1 million people to do this work. And you do need a nice cadre of folks, because as the candidate, you're going to be doing more than you knew you would anyway. As your campaign manager, they will have to fill in a whole lot of gaps. But the more volunteers you have to spread around, the better. Make sure, though, that your team reflects your constituency that you're trying to go after. Don't have a group of all white males or all African Americans or all Latinos or all. Look at the district and make sure that it's reflected. But don't relegate those on your team, particularly those that are of color, to base vote activity. So often in the political arena, as African Americans specifically and Latino, we'll be in a room and the white guys will say, okay, well, you're going to handle finance and you're going to handle media and you handle base vote. It's insulting, one, but the reality is there's other things that can be done, and you want to demonstrate a sensitivity to the electorate. You want their votes, you need to demonstrate that, not only in your campaign, but ideally after you win, that your staff and the folk around you reflect that as well. When I talked earlier about me not having had a primary, I was able to go right into the general, but the downside of that is I had a bigger, broader audience I had to talk to, unlike if it was a primary election. Also, in most districts, when you look at the primary, that is the election. In the city of Detroit, if you make it through the primary, that's it. August, that's it. You don't even have to worry about November. There's just not a Republican going to win in a 98% Democratic city. It's just not going to happen. So if you have a primary that you're running, that may be the only race you really have that's contested, if you will. And those are generally, they require less money because there's less folk participating in it. So make sure you know what those numbers are. You can have 100,000 registered voters, but again, if only 5,000 are voting on a regular basis. That's who you need to talk to. On some campaigns, I have literally had our team, our walking list, if there's 2 people on that block that vote in the special elections, the school board elections, those elections that are smaller elections, that's what we talk. We will literally go to those 2 houses, knock on those doors, and get in our car and go to the next block over and do 8 on that. I mean, that's how targeted, particularly when we did not have the resources or the capacity. The number said these are the only 2 people on the block that vote on a regular basis. Those are who we talk to. So you have to assess what works best for you all, but remember that. Enlist young people in what you do. You need them. One of the challenges I had with the Obama campaign, and I look forward to some forum where we get to talk about the challenges of the 08 election. Oftentimes we talk about the successes, and it was a successful campaign. But there were many challenges, and one of them was the way that they came into areas, they brought their whole team in, and their team ran it. And they would talk to the locals, but everything had to go through their team. So the locals who usually run things in their area were sort of pigeonholed in what they could do. The downside of that was that when they left, the capacity of that entity that usually is the voice in the community was dwindled. It really was. When we look at PFOB, when we look at organizations, NAACP, other organizations that have a field staff that get out there and do the work on a regular basis, they were pigeonholed, and they didn't get the financing, money didn't flow like it generally does. And so now when you look at the staffing levels of those organizations, it's in the tank. Those are the very organizations that can make those phone calls and make that trek up to Capitol Hill, as they usually do when you're trying to get a health care bill passed. So you have to be careful the way you structure it on your campaign, and you want to make sure that you win, but you also want to make sure that you don't destroy or add to the destruction or demise of those entities that you're going to need later when you do get into office or either run again for political office. Engage your postal workers. When we did our field operation, those people already knew the zip codes, they already knew the houses, they knew the blocks, they knew how to walk, and we got those guys, and they did our lit drops. It was just absolutely phenomenal over in Cincinnati. The Postal Service workers were phenomenal. Get your letters from organizations that will send out a letter, and the African American community, the Black church, is critical. And to have the pastors all sign a letter and send that out to key folk that you have targeted is just a powerful, powerful thing. The chamber, there's other organizations, so whatever works, enlist those folk who are willing to write those letters on your behalf. Be prepared not to ever get the party's support, and run anyhow. If you decide you're going to run anyhow. And be prepared. Don't, again, play the naive new candidate. I can't believe they won't support me. You're lucky if they do first time out. I mean, that's just the way politics runs, and it's so not personal in most instances. Sometimes it is, but most times it's not. Most times they're waging their bet, and they're trying, and one of the gentlemen talked about them needing to protect their name and their viability as well, too. So don't let that be the end all. Also know that party politics, someone said it earlier, party politics is different than elected politics. When you're talking about party politics, you're talking about delegates at a convention, which is different than appealing to an electorate. We have a young lady running for Secretary of State, and in Michigan, in order to become Secretary of State, you have to go through the party process at the convention. And so she's making her trek around the state, and she's talking specifically to the delegates to the convention. Her focus is not quite yet on the average voter. She will do that after she gets the nomination at the convention, and then the campaign turns to the electorate. So be clear about that difference. We had a gentleman, M. Scott Bowen, out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Scott, phenomenal candidate. He went on, he ran, he got to the convention, he was supposed to be the favorite there, got to the convention, a deal was cut. In Michigan, we tend to keep a couple seats for the black candidate, and that's usually the Secretary of State primarily, but in this case, Scott wanted Attorney General, he was looking to be Attorney General. Well, they made the Attorney General slot, the black candidate slot that year, and they selected another gentleman, African-American gentleman, but it was done on the party floor in the back room. And so the delegates were upset about it, and it was not a nice picture. But Scott, he wouldn't concede. Generally what happens is you get to the convention, and the party boss is probably in the back room and say, hey, it didn't look good for you, you're not going to get it, why don't you drop out now? You go up there with all your valiantness, and you drop out in the name of the party, and everybody on the surface is happy. Behind the scenes, all heck is breaking loose. Scott didn't do that. He didn't do the traditional. He says, I'm going anyway. Let's take it to the floor and let the delegates decide. And it was awesome. If you like that kind of stuff, it was a knockdown, drag out. But he didn't get it. He didn't get it. Amos did. But he was just appointed U.S. Attorney out of that district by the Obama administration. And so stay the course. That's all I can say. Stay the course and pick your fights. Some folks would probably find that they would do better by conceding, and then they could get a judgeship appointment or something else like that. But Scott didn't. He stuck in there. So sometimes it pays off. You have to go with your gut. Call in. Having your folks call into the talk shows and press and all of that, you need that. Those senior citizens or the people who are really not apolitical but very opinionated, don't concede those talk shows. Especially if you have them locally, you're very fortunate you have them. Have your folk call and your supporters, have them say something. That's important. Use that. Seek the key endorsements early. Particularly, endorsements are good, and really touched on it. But also think for new candidates, seek those endorsements with some capacity. Those endorsements who have a check that comes with it. Those endorsements who have ground troops that come with it. Those endorsements who have slates that they put out, which is when they put all the people that they support on a lit piece and they hand that out. You want your name on that. That helps you because, one, you probably have less money for your own literature, so you're probably, your quantity is lower than you probably like. Two, when it comes to distribution of that, it helps get your name out there. And on election day, a lot of those type of entities have folk at the polls, actually working the polls, which means you don't have to have your volunteers at every single poll. You can sort of work around where they already are. So those endorsements that bring added capacity, make sure that you see those. Women and African American and Latino candidates have to be very clear going in the difficulty it tends to be for them to raise money, and they have to govern and structure their campaign accordingly. Not fair, not right, but it is what it is, and you work with that. I see you standing there. Is my time running out?
A little bit.
Wow, okay. Guard against infiltrators. Towards the end of the campaign, as you start getting closer to election day, you might find folks showing up that have never showed up before. And while you like it, you should be leery of it. And it's okay. In Cincinnati, we had that happen. A gentleman showed up, and he was just the nicest guy. And so we thought, and we found out he was with the other side and attempting to do some really unscrupulous things. And that's okay. We were okay, but it does happen, so be leery. Find out who is lit dropping and working the polls. If there's organizations and entities that's all they do. On election day, they send out their troops and they do poll work. Find out who they are and see if you can get their support. Oftentimes they tell you that they may not support a particular candidate or not, but you want to make sure that you know who they are, what polls they're covering. Prep your team with information about the polling locations. When you're doing door-to-door, sometimes voters will actually say, do you know where my polling place is? Or has the polling place changed? Or if it has changed, you want to let the voters know. Thank you so much. You are aware that we're no longer voting at the school on the corner. We've been moved over to the church 6 blocks over. Make sure you're able to educate those voters. Having a team at your office or on your website that lists the polling locations. And so on election day, you'd be surprised how many people actually call and want to know where their polling place would be. And it's nice if you can direct them versus telling them to call the clerk's office or something of that nature. Make sure you know who's providing rides to the polls. If there's churches or entities that are providing rides to the polls and people call and need that, you make sure you let them know. You can also tell them, call our office if you need a ride to the polls. Your flushing operation, many of you may know, flushing is to flush the vote out. During the day of elections, there's a couple times that you go into the polling places, you check out the numbers, and you see those precincts that are lower in turnout numbers than they were 2 years ago or 4 years ago at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. That all comes from your research previously. And so you dispatch your team over there to flush out, knock on those doors, and get those people to the polls. And lastly, I'll just say this, make sure you're prepared to win. Make sure you're prepared to win. Your team is prepared to win. And what I mean by that is, someone touched on it, being well rested. That's absolutely critical. But when you win, your life changes in a way that I cannot articulate. When we won the mayor's race in Cincinnati, I was headed back home to Michigan at about 2 in the morning. And once it got around that Mark had won, my phone just was blown up. It was every news show from Good Morning America, you name it. Everybody wanted to talk to the first directly elected African-American mayor. And I'm on the phone driving home to Michigan and getting him booked at 4 o'clock, and then at 4:20, and then at 4:35, and then I'm calling him, telling him, I know you got to go to sleep, but you got to be up because we got to be here, we got to be there. So make sure you have your staff and capacity in place so that when you win, you're able to immediately move into that whole new mode. Good luck, and run hard. Thanks.